I've got a Google Drive with all my sermons in, and I've got a little folder which is Psalms for the summer, because we tend to do Psalms every summer. And I think we are really clinging on to the summer with our fingertips, aren't we? It's kind of the end of September, and we're saying, okay, we'll eke out one last Psalm. I'm really glad that we are. We're looking at Psalm 142. Can we believe everything that we see? I think it's a massively important question in this day and age, and any of you that have heard me on any occasion, you're probably thinking, yeah, he's going to go down the line of AI-generated images and all of that kind of stuff. Well, I'm not. I'm going to take you to 1917 and Cottingley. And two girls, Elsie Wright and Frances Griffiths, cut out cardboard fairies, mounted them on little pieces of wire, put them in the ground at the bottom of their garden, and took a picture with the dad's camera. And the Cottingley fairies became a thing. We would say it went viral. It went massive. There was a desperate desire in the time, 1917, to know, to see something more, to believe that there was more. All sorts of ideas were kind of swirling around society. The things that we desperately want to believe, that there's more, that fairies exist, that, all of that kind of stuff is real. So much so that Arthur Conan Doyle, the famous writer, Sherlock Holmes writer, believed in the photos. And he kind of went out on a limb. Thankfully, they finally confessed in 1983 that they had actually cut out cardboard fairies from a really well-known book at the time, which, it's kind of like if you've got a book on your bedside cabinet and you're looking at the Daily Telegraph with pictures of the Cottingham fairies and they look remarkably like the book that's next to your bed. Either the artist for the book knows the fairies in Cottingham, or the Cottingham fairies might be from the book, one or the other. But it raises a massively interesting question, isn't it? Can we believe in the things that we see? I think there's an even more important question, though. And it's, can we believe in the things that we don't see? See, we are wrapped up in our world with believing what we see. We hold on to that so much. And yet what we are as a society now is increasingly recognizing that what we see we can no longer be really sure of. There is an instability in what we see now, and we can't be sure that what we see is true. And the whole of the Christian faith is rooted, its foundation is in believing not what we see in a way, we're going to come back to that. It's not in believing what we see, it's in believing what we do not see. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1, we're going to come back to Hebrews right at the end. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 says this: what is faith? Do you have faith in this Jesus? Maybe you've come to faith, maybe you have had faith for decades, maybe faith is new to you. Maybe you're considering faith. What is faith? What is it? Faith to some extent is believing that when you sit down in a really nice restaurant and whatever the guy that wanders around the front of house, the posh bit, pulls the chair out and you sit down, that he's not going to pull it further. You can't see the chair, you're trusting that the chair is going to be there when you sit down. But at a much deeper level, the Christian faith is rooted, according to Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1, faith now is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. That's what Hebrews 11 says. It's hope and assurance in what we do not see. And this, I think, for us today, if you're thinking of faith, want to help us all maybe to understand what faith is. It's okay, it's right. In fact, it's essential to believe in what we do not see, but maybe to challenge you that if we live with that kind of fairly recent idea that I can only believe what I see, the Cottingham Fairies back in 1917 and X and Twitter and X, whatever you want to call it, and Facebook and Instagram are all of the reasons why we can no longer be sure in what we think we do see. And so we are now in a position more than ever, I think, to disrupt that idea, to kind of banish that idea that we can only believe in what we see. There is another level. There is another human experience, which is actually believing in what we do not see. But that is not either, I want to show this hopefully today, that is not kind of taking our brains out, putting them in a jar on the window ledge, walking away back to the Bible, reading it, believing it, and then putting our brains back in. That's not how it works either. So it is believing in what we do not see, but there is a logical and there is a rational believing in what we do not see. I think one of the things that the Bible does for us on many occasions is it brings us to the point of crisis for individuals in the Bible where they are at such an extreme place in life that no matter where we are in life, we can always relate to somebody in the Bible. There is always somebody who has been where we are. I pray and hope that nobody here this afternoon is in so desperate fear for their life that they are literally on the run. Speak to us afterwards if you are. But all of us can relate to that kind of fear as well, can't we? Sometimes it's irrational, sometimes it is deep-seated, sometimes it is a combination of circumstances and relationships and trials and concerns and employment and health and all of those kind of things, where we feel we really are totally isolated and right on the edge. We are done. We don't know where to turn. And so David here is this walking alongside us, saying, this is where I was when I wrote this psalm. I know what it's like. I know where you are. I know where you are in your emotions this afternoon. I know where you are in your feelings over this past month. I know what this past year has been like for you. That is why, after David experiencing this personally, he was a writer of songs, he penned the psalm. I reckon he probably penned it afterwards. He might have been in a cave writing it, thinking the lyrics. He might have been that kind of person that thinks in songs during the most depressed times. But he could quite likely have written it afterwards as he reflects back on that situation. And he wants to use his songs in ways that the people of God can sing the same songs, share in his experience, and be one with him. That's why he wrote the song. It's why the song was then sung by God's people for centuries and centuries afterwards, right until today. Many denominations continue to sing just the Psalms, which isn't a bad thing totally, because it reflects what God's people have sung literally for thousands of years, inhabiting the deepest depression. So that's step one. We understand and we can relate to where David was. And we can also say, no matter where I am in my situation, I can say with David, I'm in trouble. I don't know where to turn. What does faith look like? Faith looks like verse 2, verse 5, and verse 6. Verse 2, verse 5, and verse 6, or if you like, the mantra, if you like, they're the repeated rhythm of the song. They're the way in which it's almost like the chorus, if you like. It's the thing that you keep coming back to because it reinforces where he is, but it also reinforces for David what faith looks like. Because when he is in this situation, verse 1, verse 5, and verse 6 says this: I cry aloud. I cry to you. Listen to my cry. He knows where he is directing his fears. He knows where he is directing his concerns. He knows where to take them. If we've walked the Christian faith for any length of time and have known what it is like to be in the most desperate of situations, many of us can reflect and say, there was nowhere else to go. There was nowhere else to go, but I know where I could go. And that is faith. That is faith being expressed at that moment in time in our situation where we haven't got anywhere else to go. We don't know, in a sense, what the outcome is going to be, but we speak. I cry to you. There is a massive and incredibly helpful mental therapeutic movement that is going on in our generation. The idea of being able to talk about things and to share things. For way too long, it was bottled up and strength was hiding it away. But let me just throw in a little thought into that journey. For all the help that it most definitely is, it is very rare that we are going somewhere that can actually change the situation. And faith is actually believing that the God that we are speaking to is able to not just listen to us, but to engage with us and to engage with the situation and to see a brighter outcome. That is a huge step to make, isn't it? To believe that that's what God is like. Can we believe that? Well, that is the heart of what faith is. There is no purpose, there is no benefit whatsoever in believing in God, believing in Jesus, if all it is a fact and a truth, and it has no long-term eternal impact and hope. And faith is that believing in Jesus is that there is something beyond the pain, beyond the fear, beyond the challenge. And this is the theme of the psalm, I'll cry to you. It's a statement of faith. And the repeat shows that that's the context of the psalm. But more than this, look at it in verse 1. I pour out before him my complaint, before him I tell my trouble. There's nothing too big for God. We can go with any situation. We can even go with that sense of this is just not fair. There is a danger, I think, in kind of reducing God to our level and blaming him. I don't think that's what complaint means, bringing our complaint to him. It's not complaining against him. We can complain to the authorities about another situation, can't we? It's a complaint and we bring it to him. You say, but hang on a sec, we're talking about this idea of faith. What if God's not there? Believing in what we can't see. Yes, believing in a God that we cannot see is faith, but let me just pause for a moment and reflect on that. What if he isn't there? If he isn't there, then we truly have no hope. Do we? If God isn't actually the hearer of our cries, if there is nothing more than what we can see, then this is the best that it'll get. There is nowhere to go. There is no response. There is no hope if God is not there. And the God of the Bible and the way that the storyline of the gospel of Jesus is portrayed is to say to every one of us in your situation, yes, faith is believing in what you do not see, but faith is also a hope in something greater and better than your current situation, because without him there is nothing. So we have our deepest depression, we have a cry to you. Now we have, I think, verse 5 is almost it's kind of like the central idea and hope that the psalm brings in terms of the gospel message. I cry to you, Lord. I say, what? What can we say to God about the challenge that we've got? We can say this: you are my refuge. David was sat in a cold, damp cave, being pursued by his enemies, not knowing whether he is going to live tomorrow, terrified, isolated, without hope, and he's able to say, you are my refuge. What is the refuge there? Okay, here's the AI bit today. Here's the AI bit for this afternoon. All right. Our minds and our consciences, we've got this idea that we can download them into computers. That's a whole other massive theological subject, which is fascinating, but we're not going to cover it. But what our thoughts are doing in any situation, in lots of ways, is us, isn't it? It's us right at this moment. If I put it in the most kind of basic terms, pain does not hurt until our brain tells us that we're in pain. The situation that is terrible is not terrible until we reflect on it in our minds and in our thoughts, and we realize the horror of the situation. It's our thoughts and our minds that are entrapped by our physicality, yes, by the cold, wet, damp, isolating cave, yes, but it's in our minds. And what David is saying, I know that in my mind, in spite of this, you can be my refuge. I can go to you in my heart and in my mind and in my thoughts. And as awful as it is, you become something greater than the reality around me as far as the best that I can see. I can enter into you. I can think on you. In the dark hour when we are isolated, when things seem too much, the place of refuge is in talking to our Father in heaven, so that our minds might find a peace and a refuge in him. It's something that sometimes washes over us and overwhelms us, but it's also maybe something that we need to exercise to learn to be more in that place, to learn to spend more time knowing that he is my refuge. Look at the next bit. You are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. My portion in the land of the living is an amazing, incredible phrase. It comes from Joshua 14, verse 5. So the Israelites divided the land just as the Lord had commanded Moses. It's post entering into the land, and the land is divided up to everybody so that they have their own portion of land. What does a portion of land give you? Having walked 40 years in the wilderness, having no home, no place, a portion of land becomes yours so you can grow crops on it. It's yours. It's your place. It's where you belong. I can't remember the name of the film. It's Tom Cruise. Somebody will tell me afterwards, but it's this film about going west during the transition of North America. Far and Away, maybe? Yeah, I've got a nod. Yes, fantastic. Far and Away. And it was this idea of the land is kind of divided up, and the frontiersman would run and claim a stake in the land and say, this is my place. It's exactly like that. Gives you security. David is no longer in Jerusalem. It's been taken from him. Everything has gone. And yet, he is able to say this: you are my portion, my place, my security, not in the future, now. In the land of the living, now. You are my security. That is intellectual madness. It's intellectual madness. He is not sat in his palace, but he is so confident in his God that he is able to say, in a sense, that palace no longer matters because you are all I need in this world now. You're my portion. You're my security. You're my sustenance. You're my provision. You are everything that I need. It's amazing. So we've got our deepest depression, a cry to you, my refuge. The third is this: I know what you can restore. I know what you can restore. Look at how he goes on to pray in 6 and 7. Listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. He's actually saying, in the situation that I'm in, there's no way I can get out of this. There's no way I can resolve this problem. How often have we been in that situation? If you've had an incredibly blessed life up to now where you've never felt as though you're in that situation, maybe by God's grace you'll open your eyes in heaven and you'll have never experienced it. But I reckon that most people at some point in life are going to face something that is so huge that they can honestly say, I haven't got the strength to deal with this. There's no way I can do this. This is way beyond me. That's the context in which David is able to say the next bit: set me free from my prison. Set me free from this damp cave, that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather about me because of your goodness to me. Somehow he's saying, I can see, I can envision that there is the possibility, and it is in your hands, where I will be restored to Jerusalem, and I will continue to pursue the goal of being the king that you would have for your people, surrounded by people who worship you and praise you and rejoice in you. I can envision that. I can't do it, but you can. That's what my plea to you is. It's the most ridiculous, audacious, extraordinary plea, isn't it? You would expect David to maybe pray something like, help me find a way to escape my enemies, to find somewhere quiet where I can get settled, where I can once again just kind of hunker down, get through life, not be in fear, looking over my shoulder all the time. But what David prays is, I can envision a time where Jerusalem and the worshippers of God is once again in my vision, and I believe that you can do that. I believe that you can do that. That's his plea. In the middle of this great trial, isolation, and fear, I believe you can restore everything that seems to be lost. I know what you can restore. This is great, isn't it? This is amazing. We can enter into David's experience. We might know that we can have hope on a day-to-day basis. But let me now say, how can we really root it and ground it? David is the singer. And all of the people of God become the singers of David's song. Until one person sings it. And when Jesus becomes the ultimate singer of the song. When Jesus becomes the lamenter. Now let's walk through the framework, the ideas of the song, and imagine Jesus singing it. Imagine for Jesus to sing, I cry aloud to the Lord. I tell him my trouble. There's snares, there's hidden snares. My spirit grows faint within me. If you watch over, it is you watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare. Something terrifying that is in the way of me. It's a hidden snare. And then in Matthew chapter 26, we read this. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man, arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. And there, the snare exploded and trapped Jesus. David feels he's got snares around him, and Jesus stepped on the snare. And the hidden snare that he knew was there entrapped him. And he was taken into Jerusalem and he was tried. And he cried out. And we go to this verse. I don't know how many times we go to this verse. Just again and again we keep going back to this verse because it's almost like the words that Jesus cries on the cross pull together all of the ideas of the Psalms, all of the ideas of the Old Testament, and they point forward all the way through everything that we hope, where Jesus says, as the noon darkness came over the whole land until 3 PM. And at 3 PM, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? You want to hear a cry? David's crying out in this psalm. He's crying out in this psalm. We can hear him crying out as he sings this song, and we can repeat the cry. But we don't know the cry like Jesus cried at that moment. You see, David is crying, it feels like you've abandoned me. It feels like you have, but I trust that you haven't. And yet Jesus cried out, It feels like you have abandoned me, and I know that you have. That's the difference. Because it is in that moment that we see the true nature of what it truly is to be a rebel and to be abandoned by God, whilst being at the same time faithful in every way to that God. And if we read this, go away this evening and read this psalm again and imagine all of the ways that Jesus sings this psalm throughout his life. In fact, we could lay the last week of his life against this psalm and draw all sorts of lines between events and the words that were written by David 750 years earlier. Is that where it ends? Well, thankfully, no. Because David can envision a time when he is surrounded by praising people and Jerusalem is restored. And if Revelation 5, verse 13 captures anything, it is the culmination of what heaven looks like, with the restoration of people praising God. Verse 13, if you read Revelation chapter 5, it's kind of like these layers of people and creatures that are praising the restored, resurrected Jesus. And verse 13 concludes with this: then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea, and all that is in them, saying, what were they saying? To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever. See, David envisioned it, and God was merciful enough to restore him to that. You know, David did go back to Jerusalem, and Absalom was defeated. And Jerusalem was restored, and David was restored as king, and people praised, but it was such a temporary praise. But there's an eternal praise where Jesus becomes the final finished article of this psalm. David is the prototype. He's the blueprint, he's the picture. Jesus is the real thing. And there is our hope. And this is where believing in what we can't see, and at the same time knowing that we have to see something to believe, comes hand in hand. Because the resurrection of Jesus is both of those things. It's something that we cannot see. We cannot see a side of John's vision in Revelation where he sees a lamb looking as though it was slain, standing. That's what he says. What a complex idea that is. The idea that Jesus has been slain, but he's standing, but he's surrounded by those who are praising him. And the final culmination of all of the creation of the world, the recreation of the world, is when we are all once again praising him. How can we be sure in believing in something like that we don't see? It's because we have seen the resurrection. That's it. We've seen the resurrection. It's one of the ideas that comes across in the Gospels and particularly in the book of Acts. We can believe it because we have seen it. He is who he said he is. Revelation chapter 11 says, faith is believing in what we cannot see. And then it goes through a whole list of people who believed what they could not see. And then Revelation chapter 12 and verse 1 says this: therefore, because or since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Saying, look, it is faith. But when we've got all of these witnesses, let's get going. Let's go. We're often running. Don't let anything detract you. Don't let the things that seem so fearful give you pause. Don't let the things even more dangerous that look so appealing hold you back. Run. We're living in a world where we're struggling more than ever to believe what we see. And at the same time, I would contend, we're struggling more than ever with a sense of who we are, with a sense of what our purpose is, with a sense of where am I going. And this psalm, and Jesus, the singer of the psalm, invites us by faith to believe what we cannot see, because one day we will see what we believe.